am Jim Apologetics. I'm an amateur theologian, author, and seeker of truth. Throughout my journeys, I've dealt with every argument atheism has to offer, from its most scholarly to its most debased. In this series, I will help you navigate the lies of the atheist and expose the darkness of their story to the light of day. Whether in philosophy, history, textual criticism, or theology, I will leave no stone unturned. It is time for the true majesty and wisdom of this ancient religion to be placed in the hands of every believer. In this special production, I will give you the tools and information needed to never struggle against their attacks ever again. For lo, the Lord is with us always, even until the end of the age. Hey guys, welcome to Jim Apologetics. This is of course your host, Jim. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Every comment helps with the algorithm. The like moves the video into popular feed into YouTube, and of course every subscription is going to help the channel. Today we're going to cover briefly another subject in deconstructing atheism. I'm trying to wrap up this series as quickly as possible. It didn't get as much of the fanfare that I thought it would, and it wasn't quite as popular as I wanted, but I did promise to complete it, so I'll at least be kind of shortening the series and getting out the most important topics so that those of you who struggle with atheism can be relieved of any such doubts. These videos are not made to actually engage atheists because nobody wants to do that. Now, today we'll be discussing the issue of disease in the natural world, animal cruelty, animal suffering, and the existence of God. And so what we need to remember, first of all, is that God does not specifically choose every death of every animal as if this is an extremely important part of his plan. Rather, things occur in this world under the domain of God's creation, and the creation is the way that he created it. We also have to remember that after the fall in the Garden of Eden, the world did in fact suffer a kind of spiritual and even physical change. And so human beings, even though they were more innocent before, in the words of some of the Greek fathers, or in the Western fathers, they were not yet corrupted by sin. Now they were corrupted by sin, or were less innocent and were susceptible to sin, and that's for man. And for animal kind also, this kind of sinful nature entered into the world. Now animals themselves do not sin because they don't know really the difference between right and wrong. Although some would argue that animals do have a conscience, and that's something that we'll get to, as well as the soul of an animal later in this video. But even animal kind changed dramatically after the fall. So it's one thing to remember that the way the world is today and the way that human beings are not the way they originally were. This is especially emphasized in the Eastern tradition, so the Orthodox Church, the various Oriental churches like the Tewahedo Church, the Coptic Church, and the Syriac churches especially talk about this dramatic change of the world after the fall. So it wasn't just inherited guilt, original sin, but rather the entire world changed. And so that's a very important point, because atheists, they believe that, well, everything is the way it is since day one of creation. That's not true. Things do change. We don't believe in a static reality that eternally has always been the same. We don't have an eternally static reality. This is something out of rather kind of Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy, which of course we've covered to death, but it is important to bring up where these issues come from. So a creation that always existed is more of a Platonic ideal. We don't believe in that. Matter did not always exist. The world did not always exist. There wasn't something for this kind of lower level monad to be able to mold himself with and mold the world with. We don't believe in that. We believe God created everything ex nihilo, out of nothing. There was nothing and God created it. So we went from nothingness into creation. That's change, obviously. We went from the pre-fallen humankind to fallen humankind. That's change. And the pre-fallen animals into fallen animals. So we know that there was change in the animal and the human worlds after the fall. Another thing atheists will tell us is that there cannot be any cruelty in nature if there is a God. Therefore, there cannot be a God because nature is cruel. But that's not true, because they're basing this on the post-secular idea that infiltrated all the churches, in the West at least, that the simplest way to describe the Bible is loving, kind, compassionate, and good and merciful, and that's it. So if God is not any of these things, then He's not the God of the Bible, the secular people will claim. But that's not true, because the God of the Bible is not always loving. The God of the Bible is not always doing things that are compassionate and merciful. There is time for justice. There is time for grandeur. There is time for spectacle of violence in the Bible, both Old and New. This isn't just one of these Marcionite things where the Old Testament is brutal and harsh and the New Testament is very loving. A lot of what Christ says is not nice. A lot of what Christ does is not nice, it's not loving, but it's still coming from a place where it is the ultimate good. And so if Christ is the example of good, and Christ is mirroring the Father to us, then whatever the Father is doing also has to be good, because he's God. So it's not good because of our own assessment tells us what is good. It is good because God is the origin of good, and there is no good outside of him. And there's no way to justify goodness without having God, or while rebelling against the source of goodness itself. So with that kind of presuppositionalism dealt with, we can now look into the cruelty of the natural world. One thing to keep in mind is that animals don't have the same minds as humans. And so when animals are killing each other, and let's say a lion is hunting after a gazelle, the brain of the lion and the brain of the gazelle don't work the way the humans do. The lion and the gazelle both want to live more than anything, but this is basically on biological instinct. They aren't contemplating philosophy and how moral it is for them to be alive. The lion doesn't think about morality when he kills the gazelle, and the gazelle doesn't blame the lion for being a lion. He knows that this is the natural order. This is the nature of the lion to chase after him. He will either escape from the lion or he will not escape from the lion. That is it. There is no morality in the natural world where animals are thinking philosophically in terms of, well, I am a prey and this is unjust because I'm lower on the caste system than the lion or the tiger is. There's no concept of that. In addition, when animals are wounded, even though of course they feel pain, and by the way, anybody who rejects animal suffering acts like it's not a big deal. Themselves, they should suffer as well, because it's extremely immoral, both according to the Bible and according even to, as secular people would put it, human reason, to be disbelieving in animal suffering and to cause animals any more pain. We know that animals can feel pain, not just that, but emotional pain. So fear and anxiety, paranoia, loss of a loved one, they can mourn. But when it comes to, let's say, a gazelle losing his limb, they do not have the ability to mourn themselves and feel bad for themselves. If a dog loses his legs, so he no longer has 4 legs, but he has 3, he will quickly adapt to life with only having 3 legs. He will not miss his leg for months at a time and mourn how this part of his life was taken away from him and now his potential is different. No, he will be excited to still be alive and will adapt to having 3 legs. That doesn't mean you can go and now start chopping animals' legs off. That's so obviously a horrible thing to do. It's still bad morally to do those things. But animals don't take things in the way that we take things in. If you lose an arm, you're going to be upset about that for a while. Like I said, if a dog loses a leg, the pain will be bad, but after the pain is gone, he doesn't mourn the fact that he no longer has 4 legs. He'll either think he's the same as other dogs, won't be able to tell the difference, or will simply adapt to having 3 legs, and that's just simply how it is. So that kind of a cruelty in the natural world is answered by the fact that animals don't perceive it as cruel in the way that we perceive cruelty. So what is considered fair and just for humankind is actually different in the animal kingdom. And that's just simply how it is. And if we look at cruelty, animal world versus today, I would still say that even though the natural world looks very violent and visceral to those who are not so used to seeing the cruelty of nature, and yeah, animals aren't really able to be merciful to each other as much, humankind has been distinctly less merciful and distinctly way more violent than anything in the natural world. I mean, World War I and II, tens of millions of people died just in the continent of Europe. There's not really a scenario where animals are killing tens of millions of each other in just a couple of years, where you go somewhere like the savannah and lions have killed literally 30 million gazelles and completely wiped them off the face of the earth. That doesn't really happen. So humankind has been significantly more cruel. And now we're going to get into the fact of disease. We see often that atheists say, well, if God is real, why does cancer exist? Oh, if God is real, why did my pet dog get cancer? Why doesn't God save us from the cancer? Why does cancer exist? Why do these diseases happen to happen in this world if God is good? And the simple answer to that is that we are the origin of the vast majority of our problems and deficiencies health-wise. So when you look at cancer, that kind of a disease, even though sometimes it can just occur genetically, most of the time occurs via lifestyle choice. So the diet that we eat is cancerous. The amount of sugar you're eating is cancerous. The processed food and the oils that you're eating lead to obesity, and obesity can also lead to cancer in addition to the chemicals that you're now producing in your body and have been producing since you had that food. You have radiation coming from your laptops, from your iPhones. They're all in your pocket and they're radiating you constantly. And even today, this is better radiation, as in not as bad, as it was earlier on in the industrial period. People had lead paint, they had kind of metallic radiation poisoning. There were significantly more health hazards, and that's why people got so many different diseases 150 years ago. So it was even worse back then, but even today, with so many people around being radiated constantly by internet and TV and laptop and phone and poor diet, lack of exercise, lack of vitamin D, and all these other things can lead to diseases like cancer, and they do. The same applies to your pets, by the way. Cancer does not produce itself in the wild as often as it does with settled domestic animals. And so animals that become pets will get cancer at a higher rate than animals that are in the wild. You'll see dogs and cats getting cancer, and the owners think, oh, this is some kind of cruelty. Why isn't God saving us from this disease? Why would an innocent animal get the disease? Look at the diet you're feeding them. My cat has a health problem, right? Here, let's go get him. Let's get that boy. Say hello. That's you. That's you, little buddy. Anyway, with animals, you look at my cat, his food, he's supposed to have a health food because he has a, what is that? Some kind of like a crystal condition in his bladder. And yet, when I look at his food, it's not just meat. Like he'd be eating in the wild, he'd be having meat. It's not meat, it's meat and grains and syrup and cornmeal and wheat and all these other things that should not be in a cat's diet. And those things lead to cancer. So you wonder, why are dogs and cats getting cancer in the United States of America? Because you feed them garbage. You're feeding them garbage. They're not supposed to eat potatoes and corn. They don't know what potatoes and corn are in the wild. All right, you believe in evolution as an atheist? Evolutionarily, why is a cat eating grains and corn and potatoes? Why are carrots and peas in his diet? They should be eating meat. And yet, we see that we have some kind of carbohydrate chemical imbalance thing happening. And yes, I would feed my cat raw meat, but as I said, he has a health problem. And so even though, yes, eating this kind of food can increase your rate of cancer, his disease is bad enough that I would rather take that risk than to give him raw meat and he can get that condition. So cancer in humans is from our lifestyle. Cancer in animals is from human lifestyle. And cruelty in the animal world is cruel, but it's not as bad as what we humans do to each other. And yet we can still find ways to rationalize all these wars. That guy was with a certain socialist party, so we can eradicate that whole people. Oh, well, that ethnic group did something mean to me 200 years ago, so I can eradicate them. Animals don't even justify their violence. They don't try to make it moral. They just kill each other because that is what it is. So, in fact, I would say animals are more moral in some ways because they don't try to justify their violence. You ask the lion, if he's given the ability to speak, why did you kill the gazelle? He would answer, why would you even ask me that question? I killed the gazelle because I was hungry. That's it. There is no morality here. There's no looking down at us and saying, hey, condescendingly, morally, I found the way to kill a gazelle. You see, I was justified. 5,000 years ago, my great-grandfather, a mud skipper, was slaughtered by a gazelle. So I had to, no, there's none of that in the wild. I killed the gazelle because I was hungry. That's it. Oh, so you're not claiming any kind of Plotinian universality? No, I was just hungry. I would argue that animals are actually more moral than humans in that way. If you say, well, the Bible doesn't talk about animal cruelty, it does say to treat your animals, the ones in your possession, in a good way, and says in Exodus 23 verse 4 to treat even your enemies' animals in a good way. So killing an animal in order to harvest the meat and the fur is okay, as long as you're not making the animal suffer. The animal is probably going to die in the wild anyway. People think if you don't kill the animal, it's going to go like to a hospital bed and say farewell to all of its cousins. No. If you don't kill an animal, another animal will probably kill it or it'll starve to death. So a human being in the Old Testament killing an ox and sacrificing it to the Lord, which by the way just meant cooking it in fire, is not any worse than the way an animal would have died in nature anyways. This isn't any kind of unnecessary punishment. But yeah, so killing for meat and harvesting the goods and not being wasteful is good. But you're not even supposed to treat your enemy's ox badly. And that's more reflected in the love that you have for your enemy. It's talked about in the Torah. But at the same time, we see that we can't even harm the enemy's ox unless, we're going to kill for supplies. We can't torture and make an enemy's ox suffer. Then that means we can't do that to our own animals as well, because we're not supposed to. In addition to that, you also see the fact that animals are said to have souls in the Bible. Now, before people rise up against me and say, wait, Gene, animals aren't supposed to go to heaven. They don't have disincarnate immortal souls. I never claimed they had disincarnate immortal souls. I just claimed that whatever human beings are called of having a soul, animals are given that same word. So in the Greek, it's psyche. In the Hebrew, it's nephesh. And that does not always mean soul. Many times it'll mean the vivacity of life, the breath of life, existence itself. Sometimes it just means the body. But we can see in certain contexts that it means something more than just the physical body. It's kind of an animating principle. So animals have the same animating principle, the same breath of life as we do. They're not pieces of mortar on the ground. They are living, breathing animals that are equally alive as humans are alive. And so in that way, they do possess a soul, because of the biblical use of the word soul is the breath of life, not disincarnate Platonic reality. So thank you all for listening. This was my long spiel on animal suffering, disease, other causations that we see in our world. This is just the Atheism Deconstructed series, and the next and final one will be Atheism Deconstructed. The final episode will be physical proof for God. So I hope you guys all enjoy that. Thanks for watching so much. I know it's kind of a dry video. You guys are awesome, and I'll see you next time.